Pro wrestling is an ever-evolving industry, with encyclopedias being updated, documentaries being released, and relationships mended or destroyed. The attitudes and narratives of wrestling superstars begin to change. Individuals like the Ultimate Warrior, Bruno Sammartino, and others are brought back into prominence, while the history of some of the other bright characters are being washed away or changed. Some are pigeonholed and being remembered for that one event or that one specific moment in time. Others become as insignificant as a crossword answer. My job as PWP's resident historian is to remind you of the impact that these individuals and teams left on the industry. This is PW Profiles. When it comes to the Latin American wrestling community, people look at Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Mil Mascaras, and then the up-and-comers like Pentagon, Rey Fenix. But I think that if this next profile would have had a longer career, he might be regarded in the same light as Eddie Guerrero, and that would be Gino Hernandez. Is this someone that you've heard anything about or you're familiar with?
No.
So
Gino Hernandez.
Yes, he actually debuted for Big Time Wrestling in Detroit in 1975.
I see that he also has a Dark Side of the Ring episode.
Yes, we'll get to that. He was a very handsome man. He was great as a heel. He's a large and bodacious heel. He's often compared to Ric Flair currently. He wrestled mainly for WCCW and Mid-South Wrestling. He also was in Southwest Championship Wrestling. In Southwest Championship Wrestling, he had a phenomenal tag team with Tully Blanchard called the Dynamic Duo, and he actually took that to WCCW and teamed with Chris Adams and also called that the Dynamic Duo. While in WCCW, they had a gimmick where they would cut people's hair. They eventually lost a match to the Von Erichs, and it's probably one of the more comical hair versus hair endings of all time. Instead of just having them knocked out, they had to be pulled into the ring kicking and screaming and held down in the chair as they got their hair cut. Eventually, he and Chris Adams turned on each other, and one of the first blinding feuds happened. The Freebirds had a hair removal cream, and I'm pretty sure it was that was tossed into the eyes of Chris Adams, thus making him blind. And he lived this, in kayfabe, obviously. But it never got to really reach a climax because, unfortunately, Gino Hernandez passed away at a young age. He was one of the tragedies of WCCW that you hear about. One of the ones that's not associated with the Von Erichs. David Wolf was one of the WCCW higher-ups, and he was concerned for Gino's well-being because he no-showed 2 events, he no-showed television, and phone calls went unanswered. The police then broke into his home and discovered his decomposing corpse because it had turned out he had been dead for 3 to 4 days. Initially, it was ruled a homicide, but following autopsy, death was ruled the result of a cocaine overdose. Now, this was one of those times where people hated to admit it, but they could see that this was happening. Drugs were rampant, especially in WCCW. His manager, Gary Hart, who at the time managers would usually be bookers, or they'd also help to, travel with their superstars, tried to get Gino to get clean. In the WCCW documentary, The Rise and Fall of World Class, or The Triumphs and Tragedies of World Class, actually, Gary Hart talks about how he has pictures of all of his guys in his living room, and he says he can't have them of Gino because Gino was the one soul that he lost and he couldn't get back. He did have the Dark Side of the Ring episode, and this focused on the fact that there was cocaine in his system, but it was found in his stomach. Now, I don't do coke. I know you don't. Don't do coke, kids. but you're not going to have that much in your stomach after 3 to 4 days of decomposing. So a lot of people assume it was a hit job. And it's because the people that he worked with outside of the ring, drug dealers and traffickers. And what's interesting is the people that he ran with actually paid for his funeral. They spoke at his funeral. They did a toast. Down the dark side of the ring, one of the guys who's in prison actually called Gino's mother, who's still alive, and, told her not to worry about her daughter. He loved Gino. So there's a lot of skepticism. JBL had Legends of JBL on the network. Yeah. And it's that famous clip where he said, talking to Michael Hayes, and, oh, so you're saying he was murdered? And Michael Hayes, oh, I never said that. Oh, so he died of an overdose. I didn't say that either. So there's a lot of hush-hush around Gino. A lot more than what circulates around, your Bruiser Brodies, your David Von Erichs. There's also speculation that he faked his death because the family never saw his body. And also on the dark side of the ring, talked about how, I forget which one it exactly is now, but it either said he was circumcised or uncircumcised. And I think it said he was circumcised, and he wasn't. Which, his mother and his ex-wife at the time would know that. Also, there was ethnicity and physical reports that were wrong on the autopsy. So there's a lot of blurred lines with this. It's one of those things where people will never truly know what happened to Gino. I mentioned at the beginning, I think if he would have continued wrestling, if he would have pushed past those demons, he would be regarded as a top Latin superstar. The matches he had just with the Von Erichs and with Dusty Rhodes are ones to definitely go back and look at. Gino, I think, would have been maybe not a heavyweight champion, but at least an NWA US. If he would have made his way to WWE, he would have been an Intercontinental champion. Gino Hernandez is one of those forgotten stars that ultimately, tragically, lost to the wrestling industry. But it is his accolades and his ability before his untimely death that makes him a PW profile.